The rain hammered Marcus Washington's windshield with the kind of fury that made smart men pull over and wait it out. He kept driving. 38 years old, and he still hadn't learned when to quit fighting losing battles. Not with weather, not with ex-wives, not with the ghosts of women who'd left him a decade ago. Zoe was safe at his mother's house now, volcano project materials spread across Martha's kitchen table like a miniature disaster zone. His daughter could explain plate tectonics better than most adults, but she still needed her father to pick her up from school when Houston's October storms came down sideways. The girl had his late father's curiosity, that restless need to understand how things worked beneath the surface. Marcus saw it in the way she studied the world, picking apart mechanisms with questions that cut straight to the heart of problems. She'd be formidable someday, assuming he didn't screw up the single father thing too badly. His phone buzzed against the cup holder. A text from Zoe, borrowed from Martha's cell. "Did you remember to buy milk? Grandma says we're out." The mundane reality of his life crystallized in those 9 words. Milk, homework, getting his daughter to school on time tomorrow. The careful routine he'd built since Rebecca walked out, leaving him with a 6-year-old and a mortgage he could barely afford on a foreman's salary. That's when the flashing lights cut through the gray curtain of rain ahead. A police cruiser sat crippled on Interstate 10's shoulder, hood yawning open like a broken jaw. Hazard lights blinked their desperate rhythm into the storm. A figure in uniform stood hunched over the engine bay, completely soaked, long hair plastered to her back as water streamed off her hat. Most drivers would accelerate past, especially in weather that threatened to wash the asphalt clean off the road. Not their problem. Marcus's foot found the brake before his mind caught up to the decision. His father's voice echoed from 20 years gone, that deep rumble that had shaped every choice Marcus made. You see someone needs help? You help. Don't matter who they are or what it costs you. Gerald Washington had died fixing a stranger's car on the side of a different highway. Heart attack at 52. Too stubborn to stop working even when his chest hurt. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus every time he pulled over for someone in trouble. The truck's tires crunched gravel as he eased onto the shoulder 20 feet behind the cruiser. Marcus grabbed the umbrella from behind his seat, barely used, a gift from Zoe last Christmas, with cartoon dinosaurs dancing across the fabric, purple T-Rexes wearing party hats. The absurdity of bringing dinosaurs to rescue a cop almost made him smile. The kind of detail that would make Zoe giggle when he told her later. Rain attacked him the moment he opened the door, cold needles finding every gap in his flannel work shirt. October in Houston meant unpredictable weather, the season caught between summer's last gasp and winter's tentative arrival. His boots squelched in mud as he approached the disabled cruiser. "Need some help, officer?" The figure straightened and turned. Time didn't stop. That was movie nonsense. Physics didn't work that way. Zoe could explain the science. But something in Marcus's chest seized up hard enough that his next breath came shallow and painful. The umbrella trembled in his grip as he stared into eyes he'd spent a decade trying to forget. Green eyes. Not blue, not hazel, that specific shade of green that reminded him of spring grass after winter finally released its grip. The color that used to catch lamplight in her apartment while they talked about futures that would never arrive. The same eyes that had looked away when she returned his engagement ring, unable to meet his gaze as she destroyed everything they'd built. Lauren. Her name escaped as barely a whisper, stolen by the wind before it could reach her. But she heard it. The way her whole body went rigid told him she heard it, the name hitting her like a physical blow. For 3 heartbeats, neither moved, frozen in tableau under the storm's assault. Water ran down Marcus's face, into his collar, soaking through to skin, but he couldn't feel it. All sensation concentrated on the impossible woman standing before him in a Houston Police Department uniform. Marcus Washington. Not a question. A statement heavy with disbelief and something else he couldn't name, something that sounded dangerously close to longing. His last name in her mouth after all these years felt wrong, too formal, like hearing a stranger recite facts from his life. She used to call him baby, used to whisper his name like a prayer in the dark, used to sign her notes with, "Love you, M," until she stopped loving him, or loving him became too frightening, or whatever the hell had made her run 3 weeks before their wedding. This can't be real. The woman standing before him wore a police uniform that clung to her frame like a second skin, badge glinting dull in the storm's gray light. Her brown hair, longer than he remembered, hung in wet ropes past her shoulders. The sharp angles of her face had softened with age, crow's feet starting at the corners of those devastating eyes. She looked older, harder, like someone who'd seen too much of humanity's worst and learned to armor herself against it. But those eyes, Christ, those eyes hadn't changed at all. Lauren Anderson. Except the nameplate above her badge read Hayes now, a detail his brain cataloged even through the shock. She'd changed her name, married maybe, though he saw no ring on her left hand. The woman he'd planned to marry, the one who'd left him standing at the altar of his own life, wondering what fundamental flaw in himself had made forever too terrifying to contemplate. 3 weeks before the wedding, she'd sat in his apartment with tears streaming down her face and told him she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't be who he needed her to be, that staying would suffocate them both. Professional instinct kicked in, saving him from drowning in the past. Marcus's construction-trained mind shifted into problem-solving mode, the same mental gear he used when a wall wasn't plumb or an electrical system showed faulty wiring. Focus on the immediate concrete problem. Ignore everything else. What's wrong with the vehicle? Battery died. Just cut out in the middle of the highway. Her voice carried the same low timbre he remembered, but something harder had crept into it. Years of giving orders, maybe. Years of being someone he didn't know. Radio's down, too. Tow service is backed up at least 90 minutes in this weather. Marcus moved to the engine without waiting for permission, muscle memory taking over. He'd fixed enough vehicles on job sites to diagnose this blind. Water dripped from his hair into his eyes as he studied the battery terminals, corrosion visible even in the poor light. Simple fix, assuming the battery would hold a charge. I've got jumper cables. Hold on. The silence while he retrieved his equipment felt thick enough to choke on. Lauren stood under the dinosaur umbrella he'd thrust at her without thinking, watching him work with an expression he couldn't read and didn't want to interpret. The rain kept falling. His shirt was soaked through now, cold water running down his spine, but the physical discomfort gave him something to focus on besides the impossibility of this moment. Every movement felt hyper-conscious, like performing for an audience. Pop the Ford's hood. Locate the battery. Red to positive, black to negative. Check the connections twice because that's what Gerald Washington had taught him, and muscle memory didn't lie. The cables clicked into place with satisfying precision. Marcus fired up his truck, let it run, waited 30 seconds before trying the cruiser's ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, roaring to life with mechanical indifference to the emotional wreckage surrounding it. Some problems had simple solutions. Dead battery, live battery, electricity flows, problem solved. If only human hearts worked the same way, Marcus thought, then immediately hated himself for the sentimentality. He wasn't that man anymore, the one who believed in poetic connections and cosmic meaning. Rebecca had finished killing that romantic fool, but Lauren had struck the first blow. So you're back in town. Marcus disconnected the cables with practiced efficiency, still not looking at her. Last I heard, you were in California. Moved back 2 years ago? A pause, heavy as the storm clouds overhead. Made detective with the Houston PD. What about you? Foreman at Morrison Construction. He recited the facts like reading from a grocery list, each word clipped and precise. Married. Daughter named Zoe, 8 years old. Divorced 2 years back. The information sat between them like evidence at a crime scene. Marcus finally met her gaze, immediately regretted it. Those green eyes held something that looked like pain. Or maybe he was projecting, seeing what he wanted to see, imagining she'd suffered even a fraction of what he'd endured in the year after she left, when getting out of bed felt like climbing mountains, and his crew had staged an intervention because he'd nearly gotten Pete killed with his distraction on a roofing job. Lauren's hand touched his arm as he turned to leave, just a brief contact through the wet fabric. But it burned. Physical memory flooded back unbidden, her hands on his skin, her body against his, the way she used to trace the scars on his knuckles and ask how he got each one. He jerked away like she'd shocked him. Marcus, I know I'm the last person you want to see. The last person I wanted to see left 10 years ago. His voice came out colder than he'd intended, frost coating each word despite the humid air. You're just an officer who needed a jump. Nothing more. He watched something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe, or regret. But she composed herself with the discipline of someone trained to hide weakness. From her wallet, she produced a business card, flipping it to write on the blank back with a pen that barely worked in the rain. The card came away damp, ink slightly smudged. If you ever need anything, I owe you more than just this. The card read, Detective Lauren Hayes, Houston Police Department, in crisp, professional font. Her personal cell number was scrawled on the reverse in handwriting he recognized immediately. Those same loops and curves, the way her L always looked like a 7 at first glance, the distinctive cross of her T that slanted right. A decade hadn't changed her penmanship, that small intimacy preserved like an insect in amber. Marcus pocketed the card without promises. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the debt she claimed to owe. What could she possibly owe him? She'd already taken everything that mattered. Take care of yourself, Detective. Walking back to his truck felt like wading through concrete, every step requiring conscious effort. His boots weighed heavy with more than just rain and mud. In the rearview mirror, Lauren remained by her cruiser, one hand pressed to her chest as she watched him drive away. The gesture looked like she was trying to hold something in, or maybe keep something out. Marcus forced his eyes back to the road, focused on the white lines barely visible through the downpour. His phone buzzed before he'd made it 3 miles north on I-10. Another text from Zoe. Daddy, are you okay? You've been gone a long time. Grandma is worried. The girl had her grandmother's intuition, that uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong, even across the distance of the city. Marcus typed back one-handed, a practice he'd perfected despite Martha's lectures about distracted driving. Just got held up by the weather, baby girl. Be there in 20 minutes. Tell Grandma to stop worrying. But Martha Washington didn't stop worrying, not in 38 years of being Marcus's mother, and certainly not now. She was waiting at the door when his truck pulled into her driveway in the 3rd Ward, the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up among shotgun houses and oak trees older than the city itself. The house looked the same as it had his entire life, white paint peeling in familiar patterns, porch swing creaking in the wind, the same ceramic frog by the front steps that had welcomed him home 1,000 times. Martha's house smelled like the cinnamon rolls she'd baked that afternoon, sweet warmth wrapping around Marcus as he stepped inside. His mother looked up from where she sat with Zoe at the kitchen table, math homework spread between them like a battlefield of numbers and variables. At 65, Martha carried herself with the dignified bearing of someone who'd raised a son alone, worked double shifts at Methodist Hospital for 20 years, and never once complained about the hand life dealt her. Her hair had gone fully gray now, natural and proud, styled in the shortcut she'd worn since Marcus could remember. "Daddy!" Zoe launched herself at him with the full-body enthusiasm only an 8-year-old could muster, all 70 pounds of kinetic energy and unfiltered joy. "I got all my multiplication problems right, even the hard ones!" Marcus caught her, swung her up despite the protest of muscles that had spent all day hauling concrete blocks and steel beams. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo Rebecca insisted on buying, a small continuity between their two households. Zoe's hair, thick, kinky, beautiful, had been braided into neat cornrows that morning by Rebecca, probably the last cooperative act his ex-wife would perform for a while. "That's my girl. Knew you could do it." But Martha studied him with that unsettling perception of someone who'd changed his diapers and weathered every storm of his 38 years. Her dark eyes, still sharp behind reading glasses, missed nothing. She could read his moods the way Zoe read science textbooks, parsing meaning from the smallest details. "You're quieter than usual. Something happened." Zoe peered at him with equally suspicious eyes, her mother's eyes, brown and sharp, missing nothing. The girl had Rebecca's observational skills, combined with Marcus's tendency to worry about things beyond her control. 8 going on 30, Martha always said, and it wasn't entirely a compliment. "Did you meet someone, Daddy? You look sad." The word hit harder than it should have. That simple child's assessment, cutting straight to truth adults spent hours dancing around. Marcus waited until Zoe was distracted by her backpack, checking that she'd packed everything for tomorrow before answering his mother's raised eyebrow. "Just ran into an old friend. Nobody important." "An old friend who made you look like someone died?" Martha stood, moving to pour coffee without asking if he wanted it. The automatic gesture of maternal care, the assumption that whatever troubled her son could be at least partially addressed with caffeine and a listening ear. "That kind of old friend has a name usually." Marcus waited until Zoe was absorbed in organizing her pencils, a small obsessive ritual the girl performed every evening before speaking low enough that only Martha would hear. "Lauren Hayes." His mother's hand paused halfway to the coffee pot, ceramic mug suspended in air. When she turned, her expression carried that particular mixture of sympathy and concern that mothers reserve for their children's deepest wounds, the kind that never fully heal, that ache on cold days and whenever memory catches you unaware. "The one who left you before the wedding." "She's a detective now." Car broke down on the highway. He accepted the coffee, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. October rain carried a chill that went deeper than temperature, the kind of cold that settled into bones. Pure coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence, Marcus. Not when it comes to matters that tore your heart out and left it bleeding on the floor. Zoe glanced up, confusion creasing her forehead. The girl had radar for adult tension, probably a survival skill learned during the slow deterioration of her parents' marriage. She'd been too young to understand why Daddy slept on the couch, why Mommy cried in the bathroom, why family dinners became silent negotiations of hurt feelings and unspoken resentments. But she'd absorbed the emotional weather, learned to read storms before they broke. "Grandma, what are you talking about?" "Adult stuff, sweetheart." Martha smoothed Zoe's hair with gentle hands, a gesture of comfort and distraction. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Zoe wasn't easily distracted. She possessed her father's stubbornness, wrapped in her mother's determination, a combination that would either change the world or drive Marcus to an early grave. Possibly both. Was Miss Hayes Daddy's girlfriend before Mommy? Marcus nearly spilled his coffee. How do you know about that? Grandma told me you had your heart broken once, before you met Mommy. Zoe's voice carried the careful tone of someone trying not to upset a skittish animal. Is Miss Hayes the one who broke your heart? Martha had the grace to look sheepish, caught in the act of sharing family history with a grandchild, perhaps too young for such heavy truths. But the old woman had never believed in lying to children, even when convenient lies would smooth over rough emotional terrain. I asked why you never dated anyone after the divorce. I thought she was old enough to understand that sometimes people get hurt, and it makes them scared to try again. I'm not scared. The lie tasted bitter even as he spoke it, denial automatic and unconvincing. I'm focused on being a good father. That's different. Zoe climbed into his lap, all sharp elbows and bony knees, wrapping her arms around his neck with fierce 8-year-old conviction. She weighed almost nothing, all potential energy and growing bones, the physical presence of every choice he'd made since her birth. This child was why he got up at 5 every morning, why he worked 50-hour weeks hauling materials and managing crews, why he'd stayed in a loveless marriage longer than wisdom suggested. For her. Always for her. I don't want you to be sad, Daddy. Grandma says you used to smile more before Mommy left. The coffee cup sat forgotten on the table as Marcus held his daughter, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the small, strong heartbeat against his chest. This was his life now. PTA meetings and science projects, and making sure Zoe knew she was loved, even when her mother only saw her every other weekend, even when Rebecca's attention drifted to whatever new obsession currently captured her restless focus. Lauren Hayes belonged to a different version of himself, one who'd believed love conquered all, and promises lasted forever. That Marcus had died slowly over the course of a year, grief and disillusionment killing him by inches, until only this version remained, competent, cautious, completely closed off to the kind of vulnerability that led to devastation. I smile plenty, kiddo, especially when I'm with you. Later, after Zoe had fallen asleep in the truck on the drive home, after he'd carried her to bed and tucked her in with the worn stuffed rabbit she'd had since infancy, Marcus stood alone in his kitchen and pulled out Lauren's card. The handwriting mocked him with its familiarity, every loop and curve a small reminder of what he'd lost. How many notes had she left him during their 2 years together? Stuck to his apartment door, tucked into his textbooks, scrawled on napkins at the campus coffee shop where they'd first met. Gone to class. Love you. Don't forget we have dinner with my parents tonight. You left your jacket at my place again. You'd forget your head if it wasn't attached. Small intimacies of daily life, the accumulation of shared existence that built toward a future they never reached. He'd kept every single one until the day she returned his engagement ring, left it on his kitchen counter with a note that said simply, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Then he'd burned them all, watched the paper curl and blacken in his bathroom sink while his world fell apart around him, smoke detector shrieking like his heart, while flames consumed 2 years of love letters and grocery lists and the mundane, beautiful debris of a relationship that had felt eternal, until it wasn't. The business card should join those ashes. There was no good reason to keep it, no possible future where reaching out to Lauren Hayes would lead anywhere except pain. Marcus filed it in his wallet anyway, tucked behind his insurance card where he wouldn't see it every time he bought groceries, but where it would wait like a loaded gun, dangerous and available, tempting him toward decisions he knew better than to make. 3 days crawled by with a relentless monotony of routine. Wake at 5, make breakfast, get Zoe ready for school, drop her at the bus stop, drive to whatever construction site Morrison had them working. Today it was the elementary school renovation on the east side, replacing rotted window frames and outdated wiring in a building that should have been condemned a decade ago. The kind of work Marcus excelled at, practical problems with concrete solutions, no emotional complexity, just physics and skill and getting the job done right. His crew worked around him with comfortable efficiency born of years together. Joe Martinez, the crew leader, had been doing this dance since before Marcus graduated high school. The man could eyeball a beam and know if it was a quarter-inch off level, could read blueprints like poetry, had forgotten more about construction than most people would ever learn. At 55, Joe moved with the economical grace of someone who'd learned to conserve energy, knowing every wasted motion added up over the course of a 10-hour shift. "You've been distracted all week." Joe didn't look up from the window frame he was measuring, but his tone carried accusation disguised as concern. "That's how people get hurt. Want to tell me what's eating you?" Marcus adjusted his grip on the cordless drill, fitting another screw into place with more force than necessary. The whine of the motor covered his hesitation, gave him time to construct an answer that wasn't quite a lie. "Nothing. Just tired. I've seen you work 12-hour days and still have energy to joke around. This is different." Joe straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with a bandana that had seen better years. Better decades, really. The thing was more whole than fabric at this point. "Woman trouble?" "When isn't it woman trouble?" "Fair point." Joe's laugh held no humor, the sound of a man who'd been divorced twice and knew exactly what kind of damage romantic entanglements could inflict. "Rebecca giving you grief about Zoe again?" The mention of his ex-wife brought its own complicated tangle of emotions. Rebecca Chen had moved back to Houston 6 months ago after her relationship in Denver imploded, suddenly very interested in being part of Zoe's life again after 2 years of sporadic phone calls and forgotten birthdays. Her reappearance had disrupted the careful equilibrium Marcus had built, introducing chaos into schedules and routines that had functioned smoothly in her absence. "Rebecca's been quiet lately, surprisingly." Marcus moved to the next window, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of work. Measure twice, drill once. Check the level, adjust if necessary. Simple competence, the kind of task where skill mattered and emotional intelligence didn't factor. This is something else. His phone buzzed in his pocket during lunch break, vibrating against his thigh with persistent urgency. Unknown number, but the area code was local, 713, Houston proper. Marcus walked away from the crew, seeking privacy behind a stack of lumber that smelled of fresh pine and treated chemicals. "Marcus Washington." "Marcus, it's Lauren." Her voice sounded different over the phone, more uncertain than it had during their rain-soaked reunion. The professional detective armor had fallen away, leaving someone who sounded almost vulnerable. "I hope this isn't a bad time." Every muscle in his body went tense. Around him, the crew continued their various lunch activities. Joe arguing with Pete about last night's Astros game, Travis scrolling through his phone with the glazed expression of social media addiction, Danny napping in his truck with the windows cracked. Normal, everyday chaos, the comfortable background noise of men who worked together so long they'd become a kind of family. Marcus turned his back on all of it, needing isolation for whatever came next. "What do you need, detective?" The formality landed like he intended it, creating distance through professional titles and cold tone. If it hurt her, she didn't show it in her voice. Lauren had always been good at hiding pain, at presenting whatever face the situation required, while her real feelings stayed locked behind walls Marcus had never fully breached. "I wanted to thank you properly for helping with my car. Buy you dinner or something." A pause where he could almost see her gathering courage on the other end, steeling herself for potential rejection. "And maybe talk about what happened. You deserve an explanation." "That was 10 years ago. Water under the bridge." "Is it?" The challenge in her voice sparked something in his chest, old anger he'd thought long buried. Because the way you looked at me in that rain, Marcus, that wasn't someone who's moved on. His free hand clenched into a fist, nails digging into palm. She had no right to call him out, not after everything. No right to suggest he'd failed to properly process and move past the single most devastating event of his life before Zoe's birth. As if healing was something you could schedule and complete, check off a list like changing oil or rotating tires. What do you want from me, Lauren? Just coffee. Just 1 hour of your time. Her voice softened, vulnerability creeping in around the edges. I need to explain why I left.
You never gave me the chance to. You didn't want a chance. You wanted an escape route, and you took it. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, loud enough that Joe glanced over with concern creasing his weathered face. Marcus turned away, lowering his voice but unable to bleed the bitterness from it. I spent a year trying to understand. Then I stopped trying and got on with my life. By marrying someone you didn't love. The accusation stole his breath. How could she possibly know that? What perception or investigation or educated guess had led her to the truth of his marriage, the fundamental emptiness at its core? Marcus had never told anyone except Martha about the hollowness inside his relationship with Rebecca, the sense of going through motions while real feelings stayed locked away in whatever part of himself Lauren had destroyed. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know you, Marcus. Or I did. Her voice carried that particular quality of memory mixed with current observation, past and present overlapping. And I know what it looks like when you're in love. The way you said your ex-wife's name just now, there's no warmth there, not even anger, just nothing. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong about Rebecca, about him, about everything. But the lie wouldn't form, wouldn't take shape in his mouth, because she was right. 6 years of marriage, and he'd never felt for Rebecca a fraction of what he'd felt for Lauren in their first month together. That realization had come slowly, accumulating like interest on a debt he couldn't repay, until finally he and Rebecca had sat down and admitted their marriage was obligation more than love, routine more than passion. What do you want me to say? That you were right? That I spent 6 years living a lie with a good woman because I was too much of a coward to face being alone? Marcus, no. Let me finish. He waited for her acknowledgement, heard it in her silence. You want to know what happened after you left? I fell apart. Stopped eating, stopped sleeping, went to work like a zombie and came home to stare at walls. My crew staged an intervention because I almost got Pete killed being distracted on a roof. Joe drove me to his house and made me sleep on his couch for a week because he was afraid I'd do something stupid if left alone. The confession poured out before he could stop it. 10 years of sealed pain finding exit through the crack Lauren's reappearance had opened. His voice stayed low but intense, each word carrying the weight of months spent in purgatory. Then I met Rebecca. Sweet, stable, uncomplicated Rebecca, who wanted the same things I did: house, family, normal life. And I married her, even though I didn't love her the way I loved you. Because I thought maybe love didn't matter as much as compatibility. Maybe what we had was the outlier, the exception, and real adult relationships were built on something more stable than passion. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I'm not done. He could feel Joe watching him now, concern radiating across the job site, but Marcus couldn't stop. The whole marriage I was waiting to feel something, anything close to what I felt with you. It never came. Rebecca knew it. I knew it. We just pretended everything was fine until Zoe was old enough that divorce wouldn't completely traumatize her.
You want to know the worst part? I still don't regret it, because Zoe exists. But I regret lying to Rebecca for 6 years. I regret making her feel like she was competing with a ghost she could never beat. The confession hung between them, heavier than anything said so far. Marcus could hear Lauren's breath on the other end, quick and shallow, the sound of someone processing pain they'd caused, but never fully understood the magnitude of. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with unshed tears.
I'm sorry. That's all I can say. I'm sorry I hurt you. Sorry I wasn't brave enough. Sorry I've spent a decade being too much of a coward to come back and fix it. If I could go back and change things, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Marcus's third beer of lunch arrived in his mental count, though he hadn't actually ordered one. His hands shook slightly, adrenaline or emotion or both flooding his system. This conversation needed to end before he said something he'd regret, before old wounds opened completely and bled all over his carefully reconstructed life. Why now? Why not 5 years ago, or 3, or before I got married?
Because 5 years ago, I was still lying to myself. 3 years ago, I was dating someone else, trying to convince myself he was good enough.
Papers rustled in the background, Lauren moving with agitated energy.
And before your wedding, I almost called you the week before.
Had the phone in my hand, your number dialed, finger hovering over the call button. Why didn't you? Because you deserved to be happy. You deserved someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. I thought maybe Rebecca could give you that. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. Zoe, messaging from Martha's house where she was spending the afternoon. Having so much fun with Grandma. We made cookies and she's teaching me to knit. The image appeared a second later, his daughter's face covered in flour, grinning like she'd discovered the secret to cold fusion, holding up a lumpy attempt at a knitted scarf. Pure joy, uncomplicated by adult damage and romantic dysfunction. This was what mattered. Not Lauren's reappearance or Rebecca's demands or his own unresolved feelings. Just this 8-year-old girl who looked at him like he hung the moon. I have to get back to work, Lauren. Saturday, 1 hour. Tony's Italian on 5th Street, 7 p.m. It wasn't a question, but close enough. Just let me explain. Then, if you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to hang up and delete her number and pretend the last few days never happened. But some traitorous part of him, the part that had never quite healed, that still wondered what if, wanted to know why, needed closure or revenge or something he couldn't name. Fine. 1 hour. 7 o'clock Saturday. But after that, we're done. Thank you, Marcus. I'll be there. The line went dead. Marcus stood behind the lumber pile, watching his crew return to work, feeling like he'd just made a terrible mistake that would cost him everything he'd spent 10 years building. Saturday arrived with the inexorable march of calendar pages Marcus had watched with increasing dread. He spent the morning at Zoe's soccer game, standing on the sideline while his daughter ran in enthusiastic circles that bore little relationship to actual defensive strategy. After the game, they lost 4-2, but Zoe scored once and glowed with achievement. Rebecca approached while Zoe was distracted with juice boxes and orange slices. Her expression carried that particular tightness Marcus had learned to recognize, the look that preceded difficult conversations about schedules or money or his failures as a co-parent. She's getting better. You've been practicing with her. Every weekend she's with me, rain or shine. Marcus kept his tone neutral, refusing to rise to whatever bait she was laying. Compliments from Rebecca usually preceded criticism, sugar before medicine. You could practice with her too, on your weekends. I would if she didn't spend half her time with me asking when she gets to go back to your place. The words carried an edge, resentment bleeding through the polite facade. She's obsessed with that volcano project you're doing together. We're learning about plate tectonics. She's interested in geology.
Lauren helped with that, actually.
The words escaped before Marcus could stop them, a truth he hadn't meant to reveal. Rebecca's expression shifted from vaguely annoyed to sharp and predatory, sensing blood in the water. She knows chemistry from her forensics training. Silence stretched between them, Rebecca processing this information with visible calculation. Her jaw tightened, shoulders went rigid, the physical manifestation of anger building behind her careful composure. Lauren. As in Lauren Hayes? Your ex-fiancé? She's back in town. Works for Houston PD. Marcus tried for casual, failed spectacularly. The defensive note in his voice betrayed more than any confession. Zoe met her when she stopped by, about a work thing. You introduced our daughter to the woman who left you at the altar? Rebecca's voice climbed in pitch, drawing attention from nearby parents. She lowered it with visible effort, fury compressed into a hiss.
Are you insane? It wasn't at the altar, it was 3 weeks before. And I didn't introduce them on purpose. Lauren came by about a case. Zoe was home. They talked for 5 minutes. Another lie, stacking on previous ones, building a house of deception that would collapse the moment Rebecca applied real pressure. But admitting the truth, that he'd agreed to dinner with Lauren, that some part of him wanted this reunion despite knowing better, would trigger a custody war he couldn't afford to fight. This is exactly what I was afraid of when I moved back. Rebecca crossed her arms, body language shifting into full combat mode. You dating random women and exposing Zoe to unstable relationships? I'm not dating anyone. Lauren is investigating a theft at my work site. That's all. Really? Because Zoe spent 20 minutes yesterday telling me all about Miss Lauren, the nice police lady who's friends with Daddy, knows all about volcanoes, is really pretty, and makes Daddy smile. Rebecca pulled out her phone, fingers jabbing at the screen with barely controlled violence. We need to talk about modifying the custody arrangement. I'm calling my lawyer Monday morning. Ice shot through Marcus's veins, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with October weather and everything to do with existential threat. Custody modification meant courts and lawyers and judges deciding how much time he got with his daughter. It meant Zoe caught in the middle, forced to choose or have choices made for her. It meant everything he'd built since the divorce crumbling because he couldn't stay away from a woman who'd already destroyed him once. There's nothing to modify. Our agreement is working fine. Our daughter is spending time with your ex-girlfriend, Marcus. That's not fine. That's confusing for a child her age, exposing her to your messy romantic history before she's old enough to understand it. Rebecca's voice carried absolute conviction, the certainty of someone who'd already made up her mind and was just informing him of the decision.
I'll have my attorney contact yours next week.
She stalked off before he could respond, heels clicking on pavement, leaving Marcus standing in the aftermath of a bomb he hadn't seen coming. Across the field, Zoe laughed with her teammates, oblivious to the legal threat gathering on the horizon. This was why he should have stayed away from Lauren. Nothing good came from reopening old wounds, only fresh bleeding and collateral damage to everyone around him. But he'd committed to tonight, and Marcus Washington didn't break promises, even ones that might destroy everything he'd built, even ones made to women who'd shattered his heart, and apparently intended to do it again. This time, taking his daughter in the collateral. Tony's Italian occupied a converted house on 5th Street, all warm brick and trailing ivy that made it look transplanted from Tuscany by some culinary magic.
Marcus had been coming here since before Zoe was born, back when he and Rebecca were still pretending their marriage wasn't a slow-motion car crash. The owner, Tony Ricci, greeted him at the door with the familiar enthusiasm of an old friend who'd watched Marcus through courtship, marriage, fatherhood, divorce. "Marcus, haven't seen you in a month. You're finally bringing a lady friend." Something like that. Marcus scanned the dining room, stomach tight with anxiety that felt uncomfortably close to anticipation. His palms were sweating. When had his palms last sweated over a woman? Not with Rebecca, not even in the beginning. "She should be here soon." Tony showed him to a corner table, the kind that offered privacy without being suspiciously isolated. Marcus ordered beer and checked his watch. 7 o'clock exactly. If Lauren was still the person she'd been, she'd arrive 5 minutes early, constitutionally incapable of being late to anything. That particular neurosis had driven him crazy during their relationship, her insistence on arriving everywhere early, waiting in parking lots rather than risk being even 30 seconds behind schedule. At 6:55, the door chimed. Lauren stepped inside, and Marcus's carefully constructed composure crumbled like sugar glass. She dressed in jeans and a dark sweater, hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the severe bun she'd worn in uniform. Without the badge and the authority it conferred, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the woman he'd fallen for in a campus coffee shop when they were both too young to know better. She spotted him, and something complicated flickered across her face. Relief mixed with fear, mixed with something else he didn't want to name. Her approach seemed to take. Some habits persisted through years, and distance, and all the ways people changed. "I don't know where to start." Her voice came out smaller than he'd ever heard it. The confident detective from the highway replaced by someone who looked lost. "I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head, and now that you're sitting here, all those words feel inadequate." "Try the beginning. The part where you decided 3 weeks before our wedding that you couldn't go through with it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed in a posture he recognized as defensive even as he adopted it. Physical barrier when emotional ones proved insufficient. "That seems like a good place to start." The waiter appeared with menus, oblivious to the emotional minefield he'd wandered into. Lauren ordered wine without looking at the options, red or white, didn't matter, just something to do with her hands and mouth besides having this conversation. Marcus requested another beer even though he was driving. Needed the liquid courage or the excuse for poor decisions, whichever came first. "I was terrified." She spoke to the table rather than meeting his eyes, studying the grain of the wood like it held answers to questions she'd spent years asking. "Not of you, not of marriage specifically, but of the permanence. Of making a choice that would define the rest of my life before I'd figured out who I was." "You were 26. I was 28. Plenty of people get married younger." Even as he spoke, Marcus recognized the hollowness of the argument. Age was just a number, maturity was something else entirely, and clearly Lauren had lacked whatever quality made forever seem like possibility instead of prison. "My parents divorced when I was 12. Lauren's fingers traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass, drawing invisible designs that dissolved as quickly as they formed. "I watched my mother try to build a life after 15 years of being someone's wife, and she didn't know who she was anymore. Everything had been defined by my father, where we lived, what she did, who her friends were. When he left, she was just empty. A shell shaped like a person with nothing inside." The waiter returned with drinks, providing temporary reprieve. Lauren took a long sip of wine before continuing, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside where she stored all the truths too painful for daily examination. "I swore I'd never end up like that. I'd establish myself first, have a career, know exactly who I was as an individual before I became someone's wife. She finally looked at him, and the raw honesty in her expression hit him like a physical blow. Then I met you, and all those carefully constructed plans went out the window. We were engaged within a year, planning a wedding, talking about kids and houses, and forever.
And suddenly I was 26 and terrified I was making the same mistake my mother did. Marcus's grip tightened on his beer bottle. The explanation made sense in a way that infuriated him, logical and reasonable and completely insufficient to excuse the devastation she'd left in her wake. Understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Comprehension didn't heal wounds that had scarred over but never properly closed. So you ran to California, found yourself at the police academy. I joined the force thinking it would make me strong, independent, someone who didn't need anyone else to feel complete. Bitterness crept into her tone, self-directed and sharp as broken glass. Spent 5 years on patrol in San Jose, made detective, dated men who meant nothing and forgot them the moment they walked out the door. Convinced myself I'd made the right choice.
And now?
The question emerged rougher than intended, carrying a decade's worth of unresolved anger and hurt, and something dangerously close to hope. Hope was the worst, the most treacherous emotion, the one that got you killed, or at least destroyed, when you let it in. Lauren's laugh held no humor, just the bitter acknowledgement of time wasted and opportunities missed. Now I'm 36 years old, sitting across from the man I never stopped loving, trying to explain why I was too much of a coward to fight for us when it mattered. The words hung between them like smoke from a fire neither could extinguish. Marcus wanted to grab them, examine them, demand clarification and proof, and some kind of guarantee this wasn't just nostalgia talking. But the waiter chose that moment to return, asking if they were ready to order. They selected food neither wanted, going through the motions of civilized dining, while emotional chaos roared beneath the surface. Once alone again, Marcus forced himself to ask the question that had haunted him for 10 years, the one he'd never gotten to voice when she left, because she'd done it by note, by absence, by the coward's way of running instead of facing him. Why come back here? There are detective positions in every major city. Why Houston? The directness seemed to catch her off guard. Color crept into Lauren's cheeks, visible even in the restaurant's warm lighting. She set down her wine glass with deliberate care, like it might shatter if handled roughly, like everything in this conversation was made of glass and one wrong move would destroy it all. I knew you were here. I'd been keeping tabs. Nothing creepy, just occasional searches on social media, seeing what you were up to. His stomach dropped at the admission, the idea that she'd been watching from a distance while he'd been trying desperately to forget she existed. I saw when you got married, when Zoe was born, when your relationship status changed to divorced. And I told myself I was happy for you, that you'd moved on and built a good life. But you were lying. Not a question, an observation based on where this conversation was heading. The inevitable conclusion of a woman who moved across the country for a man she supposedly no longer wanted. Yes. The confession came out barely above a whisper, admission of a truth she'd been hiding even from herself. When the position opened up here, I had offers from Portland and San Diego. Both paid more, both had better career prospects. I chose Houston because I needed to know if what we had was real, or if I'd built it up in my memory to justify my regret. Food arrived, chicken parmesan. The revelation had shifted something between them. The accusation sparked anger in her expression, quick and hot, the first real emotion besides regret he'd seen from her tonight. Are you seriously suggesting I sabotaged my own vehicle to engineer a reunion? That's paranoid, even for someone with trust issues. Trust issues. You were 3 tables over behind the support column, helping her with that volcano project. She was so excited, and you were so patient, even when she knocked over the baking soda. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp in the intimate space. You were there? Watching us? I wasn't watching in a creepy way. I was having coffee, saw you come in, and I couldn't leave. A smile ghosted across Lauren's face, sad and wistful and longing. You're a good father, Marcus. Better than you probably give yourself credit for. Zoe's lucky to have you. The observation should have pleased him. Instead, it felt invasive, like she'd been studying his life through a window he hadn't known existed. His privacy violated not through malice, but through Lauren's inability to leave the past buried where it belonged. Zoe is everything to me. I won't let anyone hurt her, and that includes exposing her to people who might disappear without warning. The implication landed like he'd intended, a direct hit that made Lauren flinch. She's already dealing with her mother being inconsistent and unreliable. I won't add another unstable adult to her life. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that, honestly. Lauren set down her fork, giving up the pretense of eating. But I need you to know, I didn't come back planning to disrupt your life. I just wanted to see if maybe, possibly, there was still something between us worth exploring. Exploring. Marcus tested the word, found it clinical and insufficient. That's a sterile way to describe it. What would you call it? A mistake. A disaster waiting to happen. A way to guarantee Zoe gets caught in the crossfire when you decide commitment is too scary again. He drained the rest of his beer, signaling for another, even though he knew he shouldn't. 3 beers and driving was stupid, reckless, exactly the kind of decision that led to consequences he couldn't afford. But tonight felt like a night for bad choices, for saying things that should stay buried, for opening wounds that had never properly healed anyway. I spent a year after you left barely functional. Went to work, came home, stared at walls. My crew staged an intervention because I almost got someone killed being distracted on a job site. You know what Joe Martinez told me? That grief makes men dangerous around heavy machinery, that I needed to get my head straight before I got myself or someone else killed. Lauren's face had gone pale, all color draining as Marcus's words hit her like physical blows. I didn't know. How could you? You were in California finding yourself while I was falling apart. The bitterness tasted familiar, a flavor he'd thought he'd purged but apparently only buried. Then I met Rebecca, sweet, stable, uncomplicated Rebecca, who wanted the same things I did: house, family, normal life. And I married her even though I didn't love her, because I thought maybe love didn't matter as much as compatibility, as shared goals and mutual respect, and all the things relationship books say matter more than passion. Marcus, please, let me finish. He waited until she nodded before continuing, needing to say this, to make her understand the full cost of her choices. The whole marriage, I was waiting to feel something, anything close to what I felt with you. It never came. Rebecca knew it. I knew it. We just pretended everything was fine until Zoe was old enough that divorce wouldn't completely traumatize her. You want to know the worst part? I still don't regret it because Zoe exists, because she's the best thing I've ever done. But I regret lying to Rebecca for 6 years, making her feel like she was competing with a ghost she could never beat. The confession hung between them, heavier than anything said so far. Lauren's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them back with the discipline of someone trained not to show weakness in public. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion, barely contained. I'm sorry. That's all I can say. I'm sorry I hurt you.
Sorry I wasn't brave enough. Sorry I've spent a decade being too much of a coward to come back and fix it. If I could go back and change things, I would do it in a heartbeat. Marcus's third beer arrived. He stared at it without drinking, watching condensation bead on the bottle's surface, small droplets forming and running down the glass like tears. Physics, predictable and explicable, not like human emotions, which followed no rational pattern. Why now? Why not 5 years ago, or 3, or before I got married? Because 5 years ago, I was still lying to myself. 3 years ago, I was dating someone else, trying to convince myself he was good enough. Papers rustled in Lauren's purse as she shifted, nervous energy finding outlet in small movements. And before your wedding, I almost called you the week before, had the phone in my hand, your number dialed, finger hovering over the call button. Why didn't you? Because you deserved to be happy. You deserved someone who wouldn't run when things got hard. I thought maybe Rebecca could give you that. The admission came with visible pain, the acknowledgement of a choice made for his benefit that had caused harm anyway. Good intentions paving roads to hell and heartbreak. The music changed to something slow and Italian, a tenor crooning about lost love and second chances. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket, Zoe texting from Martha's house where she was spending the night, giving him this evening free for whatever terrible decisions he chose to make. Having so much fun with Grandma. We made cookies and she's teaching me to knit. The message included a photo of his daughter's face covered in flour, grinning like she'd discovered cold fusion, holding up a lumpy attempt at a knitted scarf. Pure joy, uncomplicated by adult damage and romantic dysfunction. This was what mattered, not Lauren's reappearance or Rebecca's threats or his own unresolved feelings. Just this 8-year-old girl who looked at him like he hung the moon and trusted him to keep her world stable. He showed Lauren the message, watched her expression soften as she read it, something genuine breaking through the careful control she maintained. She seems like an amazing kid. She is. Too smart for her own good, asks questions that would stump philosophy professors. Pride crept into Marcus's voice despite his best efforts to maintain emotional distance. Wants to be a scientist. Studies volcanoes and plate tectonics like other kids study cartoon characters. She's going to change the world someday, assuming I don't screw up the single father thing too badly. The project at the coffee shop. That's why you were researching chemical reactions. She has a presentation next month. I'm helping her build a scale model that actually erupts, complete with baking soda and vinegar reaction that simulates magma flow. Marcus pocketed his phone, the brief interruption having given him time to resettle his defenses. But we're not here to talk about Zoe. You wanted to explain yourself, so explain why any of this matters now. Lauren pushed her plate away, food barely touched, giving up the pretense they were here for Italian cuisine. Because I've spent 10 years in a career that's supposed to be about justice and truth. And the whole time I've been living a lie, pretending I made the right choice, pretending I don't lie awake at night thinking about what our life could have been. Our life would have been ordinary, working class ordinary, not the decorated detective career you built. Marcus couldn't keep the edge from his voice, old insecurities surfacing despite years of trying to bury them. I'm a foreman for a construction company. I make decent money, but it's not executive salary. We would have had a modest house, 2 kids maybe, date nights at places like this because we couldn't afford anything fancier. Is that really what you want? Or is this just nostalgia making the past look better than it was? The question seemed to genuinely stun her, making Lauren sit back and process what he was really asking.
Not whether she regretted leaving, but whether she could handle the reality of what staying would have meant. The difference between fantasy and fact, between imagining a life and actually living it. I don't care about money. Her voice carried conviction, but Marcus had heard convicted criminals sound equally sincere about their innocence.
I've had the career, the promotions, the respect. None of it filled the hole you left. Every case I solve, every commendation I receive, it all feels empty because I come home to nobody. I sit in my apartment with my awards and my pension plan, and I'm just alone. Pretty words, but words are easy. Actions are what matter. Marcus finally took a drink from his third beer, knowing he'd regret it in the morning, but needing the liquid courage for what came next. You walked away once already. What makes you think I'd ever trust you enough to risk it again? I can't give you guarantees. I can't promise I won't mess up or get scared or make mistakes. Lauren leaned forward, intensity radiating from her like heat from pavement after rain. But I can promise I'm not the same person who ran. 10 years of living with consequences taught me that running from problems doesn't solve them. It just means you carry them wherever you go, like luggage you can never set down. Touching sentiment, but I have Zoe to think about now. Marcus set down his beer, meeting her eyes with all the protective fury of a father who'd walk through fire for his child. She's already dealing with her mother being inconsistent and unreliable. I won't add another unstable adult to her life, someone who might disappear the moment things get difficult. He meant it as a deterrent, a wall she couldn't scale. But something shifted in Lauren's expression, determination replacing uncertainty, the detective who solved impossible cases deciding this was just another problem requiring persistence and strategy. Then let me prove it. No expectations, no pressure. Just give me a chance to show you I've changed. She reached across the table, hand stopping just short of touching his. I'm not asking you to forgive me, or take me back, or even give me hope. I'm asking for the opportunity to demonstrate, through actions, not words, that I'm worth a second look. The server appeared, asking about dessert. They both declined, and Marcus requested the check before Lauren could argue about who was paying. She let him take it without protest, seeming to understand that this small act of control mattered to him, that maintaining some boundary was essential to his emotional survival. Outside, the October night had turned cold, temperature dropping with the sun like Houston weather couldn't decide what season it wanted to be. Lauren hugged herself against the chill, having left her jacket in the car, breath misting in the air between them. Marcus's instinct was to offer his coat the way he always had during their relationship, but he suppressed it. Those kinds of gestures belonged to a different version of them, one that no longer existed, and maybe never had except in his imagination. Thank you for hearing me out. Lauren's breath created small clouds in the cooling air. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know I never stopped regretting what I did. Marcus studied her in the street light's glow, cataloging the ways age had changed her. Fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness to her jaw that spoke of difficult decisions and long nights solving cases that revealed humanity's worst. But underneath, he could still see traces of the woman he'd loved, the one who'd laughed at his terrible jokes, who'd fallen asleep during movies with her head on his shoulder, who'd made him believe in happily ever after until she stopped believing in it herself. I don't know what you're expecting from this. He kept his distance, afraid that closing the gap would undo all his carefully maintained resolve, that proximity would weaken defenses he'd spent 10 years building. I can't just forgive and forget. Zoe comes first, always, and bringing someone into her life who might leave again when commitment gets scary. I can't do that to her. I understand. Lauren pulled her keys from her purse, the jangle loud in the quiet street, metal against metal like small bells announcing endings. But if you ever want to talk, or if you need anything,
You have my number. No strings, no expectations, just, I'm here if you want me to be. She walked to her car, a sensible sedan, not the cruiser, civilian life separate from police work, and drove away without looking back. Marcus stood on the sidewalk long after her taillights disappeared, trying to sort through the emotional wreckage of the evening, feeling like he'd survived something, but couldn't name what. His phone buzzed. Not Zoe this time, but Martha calling about his daughter's well-being, and also, he suspected, about how tonight went. He let it go to voicemail, not ready to explain what he didn't understand himself.
How seeing Lauren had opened wounds he'd thought healed. How part of him wanted to chase after her sedan, see where this led, risk everything for the possibility of recapturing what they'd lost. How the smarter part knew that way led to destruction, to Zoe caught in the crossfire when Lauren's fear inevitably resurfaced and she ran again. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and traffic signals, his mind replaying the conversation, analyzing every word for hidden meaning or future threat. His house felt emptier than usual without Zoe's chaos filling it. Just him and silence, and too many thoughts he couldn't organize into any coherent pattern. He poured himself whiskey he didn't want, sat on the porch in the cold, and let himself remember things he'd tried to forget. Their first kiss outside that campus coffee shop, her tasting like caramel and sugar. Moving into their first apartment together with nothing but second-hand furniture and big dreams. The night he proposed in the park where they'd had their first real conversation, ring box shaking in his nervous hands, her saying yes through tears and laughter. Then the harder memories, the growing distance in those final weeks before the wedding, her increasingly frequent mentions of not being ready, the night she'd come to him with red eyes and a confession he hadn't wanted to hear, the emptiness after, like someone had scooped out his insides and left him hollow, going through motions of living without actually being alive. He'd survived it, built a life, had a daughter, created routines and structures that kept him functioning even when functioning felt impossible. Lauren's return threatened all that stability, opening wounds he'd thought scarred over, making him feel things he'd learned to bury under responsibility and routine and the daily grind of single fatherhood. But God help him, seeing her again had reminded him what it felt like to be fully alive instead of just existing. The question was whether that aliveness was worth the risk of destruction when it all fell apart again. And it would fall apart. History showed that clearly enough. Some people were meant to be alone, meant to focus on work and children and concrete things instead of chasing romantic fantasies that ended in disaster. Marcus finished his whiskey, checked the locks, set the alarm, went through his nightly routine with automatic precision. Tomorrow Zoe would come home, and life would return to normal. Breakfast and cartoons and the beautiful mundane chaos of raising a curious 8-year-old. He'd forget about Lauren Hayes and her green eyes and her promises to prove she'd changed. He'd focus on what mattered, what was real and present and dependable. But that night, alone in his empty house, Marcus pulled out Lauren's card one more time and stared at her handwriting until exhaustion finally dragged him toward sleep. Thursday evening brought unexpected visitors. Marcus had just gotten Zoe settled with homework when the doorbell rang. Rebecca stood on his porch, looking older than her 37 years, stress evident in every line of her face. Her designer work clothes seemed incongruous with the defeated slump of her shoulders. "We need to talk. Privately." They stepped onto the porch while Zoe remained inside with her math worksheets. The October air carried a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Rebecca wouldn't meet his eyes at first, staring instead at the peeling paint on the porch rail like it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "I got a call from Principal Morrison about Zoe's fight."
He said she's been showing signs of stress and anxiety, that the custody uncertainty is affecting her.
Marcus felt ice form in his chest. The fight had happened 3 days ago. Zoe pushing a boy named Trevor who'd said cruel things about divorced families. The school had called it an isolated incident, suspended her for 3 days, sent her home with warnings about violence and emotional regulation. He'd thought the matter closed. I'm handling it. Zoe and I talked about appropriate responses to bullying. Are you? Rebecca finally looked at him, and her expression wasn't angry like he'd expected, just tired, defeated. Because from where I'm standing, our daughter is falling apart while we fight over schedules and living arrangements and who you're dating. I told you I'm not. Please don't lie to me anymore, Marcus. Rebecca held up a hand, stopping the denial before it could fully form. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Saturday. A lot of therapy, actually. My counselor helped me see something I should have realized years ago. She pulled her jacket tighter against the evening chill. I've been trying to control your romantic life because I'm terrified of being replaced in Zoe's affections. Not because you're actually doing anything wrong, but because watching you move on with someone you actually love triggers every insecurity I have about our marriage. The admission stunned him into silence. This wasn't the Rebecca he knew, the one who led with accusations and threats. This was someone who'd done the hard work of examining her own motivations, facing uncomfortable truths about herself. I'm dropping the custody modification. We keep things 50-50, same as now. Zoe stays with you on your weeks, with me on mine. Rebecca's voice was steady, resolved. And if you are involved with Lauren, or if you want to be, I need you to be honest about it. With me, with Zoe, with yourself. Because secrets are worse than truth, and kids always know when adults are lying. Marcus gripped the porch rail, needing something solid to anchor himself. Why the change? Last week you were ready to take me to court. Because I talked to my therapist, who pointed out I was using legal threats to avoid dealing with my own fear of inadequacy. Rebecca pulled out her phone, swiped to a photo. And because Zoe drew this at my house yesterday. The image showed a child's crayon rendering of 4 people holding hands. Labels identified them: Daddy, Zoe, Mommy, and a 4th figure with a badge labeled Miss Lauren. They stood in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead, everyone smiling with the uncomplicated happiness only children's art could capture. She's already accepted Lauren as part of her world. Fighting that would only hurt her. Rebecca put away her phone. I can't control who you love, Marcus. And trying to do that was really about my own insecurity, not about protecting Zoe. She walked to her car, paused with her hand on the door handle. Don't let this one go. Whatever fears you have, work through them. Second chances are rare, especially ones that feel this right. Zoe deserves to see her father happy, and maybe I deserve to stop being the obstacle to that. Marcus watched her taillights disappear down the street, processing a conversation that had just dismantled his primary excuse for keeping Lauren at distance. Rebecca's blessing removed the legal threat, the custody battle that had seemed inevitable. It stripped away his armor, leaving him exposed to the very vulnerability he'd been avoiding. Inside, Zoe looked up from her homework with eyes too perceptive for 8 years old. Was that Mommy? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, baby girl. Marcus pulled her into a hug, breathing in strawberry shampoo and the simple trust children have that adults will protect them from harm. Actually, everything might be better than fine. That night, after Zoe slept, Marcus stood in his kitchen and stared at Lauren's card for the 100th time. The handwriting seemed to mock him with possibility, every loop and curve a reminder of what he'd lost and what he might reclaim. His thumb hovered over his phone, Lauren's number already dialed, requiring only the courage to press call. The phone rang twice before she answered. Background noise suggested she was still at work despite the late hour, the particular controlled chaos of a police department after dark. Marcus? Just his name, but the hope in her voice nearly undid him. He could picture her wherever she was, probably at a desk covered in case files, hair pulled back severely, the detective armor she wore to face the world's darkness. Can you come over tonight? After Zoe's asleep? His heart pounded like he was 16 instead of 38, asking a girl out for the first time instead of potentially destroying his life. We need to talk.
Really talk about what we're doing and what we want, and whether any of this is even possible. Silence stretched long enough that Marcus thought the connection had dropped. Then Lauren's voice came through, careful and hopeful and terrified in equal measure. I'll be there at 9. Martha arrived at 8:30 to watch Zoe while she slept, giving Marcus this evening free for whatever terrible or wonderful decisions he chose to make. His mother's knowing look spoke volumes, but she kept her wisdom to herself for once, just squeezed his shoulder as she settled into the living room with her knitting. Don't screw this up, Marcus. Second chances don't come along every day. No pressure or anything. Lauren arrived exactly at 9, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked nervous, vulnerable in a way he rarely saw. The confident detective replaced by someone who'd risked everything on a phone call and didn't know what she'd receive in return. They sat on his porch under the October stars, Houston's light pollution making the sky more suggestion than reality. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between them like a physical presence. Marcus broke the silence with the truth he'd been avoiding. Rebecca dropped the custody modification. She essentially gave us her blessing to figure out what we're doing, as long as we're honest with Zoe. Lauren's eyes widened, surprise and something like hope flickering across her features. That's unexpected? Yeah. He turned to face her fully, needing her to see his sincerity and his fear in equal measure. Which means the excuses are gone. The reasons we've been using to keep distance, to avoid defining this, they don't apply anymore. So what are we doing, Lauren? Her voice held a tremor when she spoke, fear and hope mixing into something fragile and precious. What do you want us to be doing? Marcus reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. The contact felt electric, charged with possibility and risk and the memory of every time they'd touched before. Physical connection that his body remembered even when his mind tried to forget. I don't know, but I'm tired of pretending I don't want to find out. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, surrendering to gravity and hoping the fall wouldn't kill him. I'm scared of hurting you again, of not being enough, of all the ways this could go wrong. But I'm more scared of spending another decade wondering what if. Lauren moved closer until their shoulders touched, until he could feel her warmth and smell her perfume and see the pulse jumping in her throat. Me too. But what about Zoe? I meant what I said at dinner. I won't come between you and your daughter. Then we take it slow. Really slow. Marcus's thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. Unconscious intimacy his body initiated without permission. You meet Zoe again, but as my friend first. We don't tell her we're dating until we're both sure this is real. Until I'm sure you're not going to run when things get hard. That's fair. More than fair. Lauren's free hand rose to his face, fingers trembling as they traced his jawline. I know I have to earn your trust back. I know words aren't enough. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, for however long it takes. No guarantees, no promises of forever. Marcus needed to establish boundaries, even as every cell in his body wanted to abandon caution and dive into this head first. Just two people figuring out if what we had can exist in who we are now.
I can live with that. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper, soft as the October breeze that moved through the oak trees overhead. As long as I get the chance to prove I've changed. The kiss happened without conscious decision, both of them leaning in simultaneously like gravity had shifted and pulled them together. Her lips tasted different than memory suggested, coffee and wine and 10 years of living separate lives. But underneath, the connection remained. The spark that had made him believe in forever once before, dormant but not dead, waiting for permission to reignite. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. The armor he'd built, the walls that kept him safe and alone and functioning, they crumbled under the force of this moment, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. No more running. His voice was rough with emotion, barely contained. If we do this, you have to promise me that much. When it gets hard, when you get scared, you stay, and we work through it instead of disappearing. No more running. Lauren's arms wrapped around him, holding tight like he might disappear if she let go. I'm here for real this time, for as long as you'll have me. They sat intertwined under the stars, two people who'd found each other twice, refusing to waste another moment on fear. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and terrifying, but for the first time in a decade, Marcus let himself hope it might also be beautiful. 3 days passed in careful negotiation of new boundaries and old feelings. Marcus and Lauren texted throughout the day, small exchanges about work and weather and the mundane details of daily life. Nothing heavy, just maintaining connection without pressure. They met for coffee twice, 30-minute breaks stolen from work schedules, conversations that stayed carefully neutral while their eyes said everything their mouths couldn't. Thursday afternoon, Lauren called with news about the construction site theft. Her voice carried professional crispness, the detective reporting findings to a civilian, but underneath, Marcus heard exhaustion. We recovered most of the stolen materials, made an arrest this morning. Ricardo Salazar runs an illegal gambling operation out of a bar in the East End. Papers rustled in the background. Carlos Torres gave testimony that was crucial for building the case. The DA offered him a deal, probation and community service in exchange for cooperation. Marcus felt relief and sadness war in his chest. Danny had betrayed the crew, helped criminals access the site, but he'd also come clean and helped make things right. Redemption was possible even after terrible choices. Maybe that applied to more than just young workers with gambling problems. How's Danny holding up? Scared, grateful, getting help for the gambling addiction through court-mandated counseling. Lauren paused. He asked me to thank you, said you could have pressed additional charges but didn't, that your statement to police about his work ethic made the difference in getting the deal approved. Everyone deserves a second chance. The words came out before Marcus could stop them, carrying weight beyond their surface meaning. The question is what you do with it. Yeah, Lauren's voice softened. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The conversation shifted to personal territory, professional distance dissolving. They talked about Zoe's upcoming science presentation, about Martha's insistence that Marcus bring someone to Sunday dinner, about whether meeting at the park this weekend would be too forward or exactly right. I'd like to see Zoe again, if that's okay with you. Lauren's request came tentative, aware she was asking for access to the most precious part of Marcus's life. Maybe we could go to the Science Museum? You mentioned she's working on that volcano project. Marcus hesitated, old fear rising. Introducing Lauren to Zoe again meant crossing a line, making this real in ways coffee dates and stolen kisses on dark porches couldn't match. But Rebecca's words echoed in his mind. Secrets are worse than truth. Kids always know when adults are lying. Saturday afternoon. I'll pick you up at 1. The museum trip became a test Marcus hadn't consciously designed, but found himself administering anyway. He watched how Lauren interacted with Zoe, looking for signs of impatience or discomfort, or the inability to connect with children. Instead, he saw genuine engagement. Lauren kneeling to Zoe's height to examine exhibits, asking questions that treated his daughter like an intelligent person rather than a cute accessory. Zoe's directness ambushed them both in the geology section, standing before a massive cross-section of Earth's layers. Are you Daddy's girlfriend now? Grandma says you used to be, but you got scared. Marcus wanted to disappear into the floor. Lauren handled it with honesty that made his chest tighten. You're right, I did get scared. A long time ago. She met Zoe's eyes with the same respect she'd given adult. I made a big mistake and hurt your dad. I'm trying to make up for it now, but that takes time. So I'm his friend first. Is that okay with you? Zoe studied Lauren with an 8-year-old's brutal assessment, weighing truth against instinct in whatever mysterious calculation children used to judge adults. Daddy's been smiling more since you came back, and Grandma says everyone deserves second chances, so I guess it's okay. But if you hurt him again, I'll be really mad. That's fair. I would be mad too. Lauren's solemnity matched Zoe's seriousness. I promise I'm going to try my very best not to hurt him. Okay. Now can we go see the volcano exhibit? I want to show you my project idea. The afternoon unfolded with unexpected ease. Zoe monopolized Lauren's attention, explaining plate tectonics and magma composition, and the difference between shield and composite volcanoes with the fervor of a true believer. Lauren listened with genuine interest, asked informed questions from her chemistry background, never talked down or dismissed Zoe's passionate monologues. Over lunch in the museum cafe, Zoe dropped another bomb with characteristic bluntness. If you and Daddy get married, would you be my stepmom? Marcus choked on his water. Lauren's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or dispel. Whoa, baby girl. We're not talking about marriage. We're just dating. Marcus tried for casual, failed spectacularly at hiding his panic. That's a long way off, if it even happens. But if you date for a long time, sometimes people get married. That's what happened with Daddy and Mommy. Zoe's logic was merciless in its simplicity. Except Daddy says he didn't love Mommy enough. Do you love Miss Lauren enough? The silence stretched, painful and profound. Too big a question, too soon, too complicated for a museum cafe on a Saturday afternoon. But also not wrong, which made it worse. Marcus met Lauren's eyes across the table, saw his own conflict reflected back. I loved her a long time ago. I'm learning to trust those feelings again. The honesty felt dangerous, exposing vulnerability in front of his daughter and the woman who'd destroyed him once already. But love isn't enough by itself. You also need trust and patience and both people working together. We're still figuring that out. Zoe seemed satisfied with the answer, attention already shifting to her chocolate milk and the afternoon's remaining exhibits. But the question lingered between Marcus and Lauren, adding weight to decisions they hadn't made yet, futures they hadn't dared imagine. That evening, after dropping Lauren at her apartment with a kiss that promised more than either was ready to deliver, Marcus found himself at Martha's house. His mother was waiting with coffee and the particular expression that meant she intended to dispense wisdom whether he wanted it or not. "Zoe called me. Said you and Lauren took her to the museum." Martha poured coffee with practiced efficiency. "She likes her. Says Lauren is smart and doesn't treat her like a baby." "Yeah." Marcus accepted the mug, grateful for something to do with his hands. "It went well. Better than I expected." "So what's stopping you?" His mother had never been one for subtle approaches. "I see the way you look at her, baby. Like you're drowning and she's oxygen. Same way you looked at her 10 years ago, before she ran." "What if she runs again? What if I let myself love her completely and she decides it's too much, too hard, too permanent?" Marcus stared into his coffee like it held answers.
I can survive my own heartbreaking. I did it once already. But Zoe's already attached. If Lauren leaves now, it destroys her too. Life doesn't come with guarantees, Marcus. You think I knew your father would die at 52? You think I wasn't terrified every time he worked on someone's car that his heart might give out? Martha's voice carried the weight of lived experience, decades of choosing love despite fear. But I had 25 years with a good man who made me laugh every day. I'd rather have those years and the grief that followed than a lifetime of safety and nothing. It's not just about me anymore. I have Zoe to protect. You think protecting her means showing her how to be afraid? How to build walls so high nobody can get in? Martha's hand covered his, warm and solid and certain. Or do you protect her by showing her how to be brave, how to risk your heart because some things are worth the danger? The words hit like physical blows, truth delivered with a mother's brutal precision. Marcus had spent 10 years teaching himself to be careful, to choose safety over vulnerability, to build a life that couldn't be destroyed by someone else's choices. But in doing so, he'd also taught himself to be half alive, going through motions without real feeling, protecting himself so completely he'd forgotten how to actually live. What if I mess this up? What if I'm so damaged from last time that I sabotage it before it even starts? Then you try again. You apologize, you communicate, you work through it like adults who actually want to be together. Martha squeezed his hand. Love isn't about being perfect, baby. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Marcus drove home through Houston's late-night traffic, processing wisdom he didn't want to acknowledge but couldn't deny. His phone buzzed at a red light, Lauren texting about the day, about how much she'd enjoyed meeting Zoe properly, about hoping they could do it again soon. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the darkness, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the house he'd built into a fortress of routine and safety. Inside, Zoe slept with dreams of volcanoes and plate tectonics. Outside, somewhere in the Houston night, Lauren was doing the same things he was, questioning, hoping, terrified of making the wrong choice. The realization hit him like lightning. They were both scared, both broken by the past, both risking everything for the possibility that what they'd had could survive into what they'd become. That fear didn't make them weak, it made them human. And maybe that was enough. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed before courage could fail. I'm falling in love with you again. Or maybe I never stopped. And it terrifies me. But I'm choosing it anyway. The response came almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was running. I'm not running anymore. 2 weeks later,
Marcus found himself at Martha's Sunday dinner with Lauren at his side, watching his mother and daughter gang up on her with questions about police work and forensics and whether she'd ever been in a car chase. Lauren fielded interrogation with grace, matching Martha's directness with honesty, engaging Zoe's curiosity with respect. Rebecca showed up halfway through dessert with a man she introduced as Greg, her accountant boyfriend, with kind eyes and genuine interest in Zoe's volcano presentation.
The adults navigated potential awkwardness with surprising maturity. 4 people committed to making a blended family work for the sake of one 8-year-old girl. Marcus watched it all unfold, his daughter laughing, his mother satisfied, his ex-wife at peace, his girlfriend fitting into the complicated puzzle of his life like she'd always belonged there. The fear remained, lurking in corners of his mind where old wounds never fully healed. But alongside it lived something more powerful: hope. That night, after everyone had left and Zoe was asleep, Marcus stood on his porch and looked at the stars. Lauren was at home, probably thinking about the day, probably scared in the same ways he was scared. Tomorrow they'd talk, navigate another day of figuring out how 2 broken people could build something whole. Next week, Zoe would present her volcano project and probably set off the fire alarm. Next month, he'd have to renew the lease on his truck, and Martha would keep pushing about when he was going to propose. But tonight, standing under October stars with the taste of Lauren's goodbye kiss still on his lips, Marcus Washington let himself believe in second chances. Not because they were guaranteed to work, but because some risks were worth taking. Some falls were worth the jump. Some hearts, once broken, could learn to beat again. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and terrifying, and potentially beautiful. He'd spent a decade playing it safe, protecting himself so completely he'd forgotten how to actually live. Now he chose vulnerability over safety, hope over fear, love over the walls he'd built to keep pain out. No more running. Not from the past, not from possibility, not from the woman who'd broken him and might break him again. Just 2 people choosing each other, one terrified day at a time, building something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. It would have to be enough. It would be everything.